Casablanca gave us unforgettable lines, romance, and wartime drama. But behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Scripts were unfinished, sets were recycled, and nobody knew how it would end. These are 20 hidden details in Casablanca you completely missed. Number 1. That polished, perfectly structured screenplay you've studied in film school did not exist during production. Screenwriter Julius Epstein and his twin brother Philip were literally writing Casablanca while cameras rolled on the Warner Brothers lot in the summer of 1942. The script was based on Murray Burnett's unproduced play Everybody Comes to Rick's, but the Epsteins were rewriting scenes the morning actors performed them. Julius Epstein left mid-production to film a Frank Capra documentary, forcing Philip to write alone for 2 weeks. According to Aljon Harmitz's definitive book Round Up the Usual Suspects, actors received new dialogue pages as they walked onto set. Bogart complained to production head Hal Wallace that he didn't know what the hell this picture was about. The chaos created tension but also spontaneity. Number 2. Ingrid Bergman's torn, conflicted performance between Rick and Victor Laszlo wasn't acting technique. She genuinely didn't know which man Ilsa would choose, because director Michael Curtiz refused to tell her. The script's ending changed daily. Curtiz and the Epsteins shot multiple versions with Ilsa staying with Rick, Ilsa leaving with Laszlo, even a version where Rick died. Bergman asked repeatedly who her character loved. Curtiz told her to play it in between, so the footage would work for any ending. Notice in the Paris flashback and the Casablanca reunion scenes, she brings equal intensity to both relationships because she was genuinely uncertain. The confusion cost Warner Brothers $75,000 in budget overruns from reshoots. Test audiences eventually decided the noble ending tested better. Number 3. Rick's Café Américain, that atmospheric sanctuary filled with refugees and intrigue, wasn't built for Casablanca. The set was recycled from a 1938 Warner Brothers film and hastily redressed with Moroccan props. Even stranger, the Paris flashback sequence where Rick and Ilsa fall in love was filmed on the exact same soundstage, just with different furniture and lighting. If you look closely during the Paris cafe scene where they drink champagne, you can spot the identical archway visible in Rick's cafe. Production designer Carl Jules Weil admitted in studio notes that redressing the same set saved Warner Brothers $18,000, crucial when the production was already over budget. The spatial geography makes no sense because Paris and Casablanca literally shared the same walls. Number 4. Humphrey Bogart wasn't Warner Brothers' first choice to play Rick Blaine. Studio memos from April 1942, preserved in the USC Cinematic Arts Archives, list Ronald Reagan, George Raft, and Dennis Morgan as preferred leads. Reagan was seriously considered before his military service began. Raft, a bigger star than Bogart at the time, refused the role because he didn't want to star in anything with a woman's name in the title. Dennis Morgan wanted too much money. Bogart got the role as punishment casting after George Raft's rejection. Executives figured the lower-paid actor would accept anything. Bogart was known for detective films and gangster roles, not romantic leads. Hal Wallace worried his tough guy persona wouldn't sell wartime sentimentality, but Bogart's world-weary cynicism became the character's signature. Number 5. In the dramatic final airport scene with the plane waiting in the fog, the plane is a cardboard cutout. Warner Brothers couldn't afford to rent or build a full-scale aircraft after overspending on sets and rewrites. The art department constructed a half-scale plywood model and used forced perspective to make it look real. The ground crew moving around the aircraft are little people, proportionally smaller humans hired to make the fake plane seem full-sized. Watch the mechanics in the background closely. They're obviously miniature compared to the supposed distance. The thick fog wasn't an atmospheric choice. It was desperately added in post-production to hide the obvious fakery. Cinematographer Arthur Edison used every diffusion filter he owned to conceal the plywood prop. Number 6. Dooley Wilson, who plays Sam, the piano player at Rick's Cafe, couldn't actually play piano. He was a drummer and singer. Every scene where Sam performs as time goes by, a studio musician named Elliot Carpenter was hidden behind the upright piano playing the actual music. Wilson's hands were carefully choreographed to roughly match Elliot Carpenter's playing, but if you watch Sam's finger placement during the iconic performance, it doesn't remotely correspond to the notes you're hearing. The timing is off by half a second in multiple shots. Warner Brothers discovered Dooley Wilson couldn't play piano after casting him, but feared replacing him would delay production further. Michael Curtiz adjusted camera angles to minimize hand close-ups. The deception worked completely. Number 7. The film's central romance, Ilsa torn between Rick and her resistance leader husband, was nearly destroyed by the Hays Code's censorship office. Original script drafts, preserved in the Margaret Herrick Library's Production Code Administration files, explicitly showed Ilsa sleeping with Rick in Paris while still married to Victor Laszlo. The PCA rejected the script outright, calling it adultery glorification. The Epstein brothers submitted 14 different revisions trying to satisfy censors while keeping the emotional core intact. The solution was making Ilsa believe Laszlo was dead during the Paris affair, eliminating the adultery. Even then, censors demanded the relationship remain chaste on screen. The famous beautiful friendship line between Rick and Captain Renault was added as heterosexual reassurance after censors worried their banter seemed too intimate. Number 8. Director Michael Curtiz, a Hungarian immigrant, spoke notoriously broken English, creating bizarre on-set chaos. He'd yell poodle when he meant puddle, confusing the crew for hours until someone figured out he wanted fake rain. Actors learned to translate his mangled directions. According to James Robertson's Curtiz biography, Bogart mocked the director's language daily, nearly getting fired 3 times. Michael Curtiz once screamed at an extra to bring that limping piano over here, meaning the piano player with a limp. The language barrier created genuine tension, but it also forced unique improvisations. Actors had to interpret emotional intention rather than follow precise direction. This created Casablanca's naturalistic performances. Curtiz's fractured English made him feel like an outsider in Hollywood. Number 9. The extras filling Rick's cafe weren't professional Hollywood background actors. They were actual European refugees who'd fled Nazi persecution. Warner Brothers, one of the few studios vocally anti-Nazi before Pearl Harbor, hired displaced actors through Los Angeles relief organizations. Many had been stage performers, musicians, and film actors in Germany, Austria, and France before escaping. During the La Marseillaise scene, where cafe patrons sing the French anthem to drown out German officers, many extras were crying real tears. They weren't acting. They were genuine emotions from people who'd lost their countries. Conrad Veidt, who plays Mayor Strasser with chilling Nazi authority, was himself a German refugee who fled when Hitler rose to power. Veidt hated Nazis and accepted the villain role specifically to portray their evil. Number 10. Casablanca's release wasn't planned for November 1942. Warner Brothers originally scheduled it for early 1943, a standard mid-budget drama release. Then Allied forces invaded North Africa in Operation Torch on November 8th, 1942. Capturing the real city of Casablanca. Studio executives realized they had a film named after a city suddenly dominating headlines. They rushed the edit, pushed the premiere to November 26, 1942, just 3 weeks after the invasion, and capitalized on the Casablanca conference timing. The film opened in one theater, the Hollywood Theater in New York, qualifying it for 1943 Oscar consideration. Initial reviews were mixed. The New York Times called it a picture which makes the spine tingle and the heart take a leap. Others dismissed it as routine wartime propaganda. Number 11. The letters of transit that drive the entire plot make absolutely no legal sense. They're supposedly signed by General Charles de Gaulle and guarantee safe passage. But de Gaulle led the Free French forces in exile. He had no authority to issue documents valid in Vichy-controlled Morocco. The Epstein brothers knew this. Studio memos show they debated the logical problem. Jack Warner's response, according to 1970s interviews with Julius Epstein, was, "Who cares? The audience won't think about it." He was right. If you pause on the letters close up, the signatures are illegible scribbles. The prop department didn't even bother creating convincing forgeries. Test audiences never questioned the plot device. The letters are pure MacGuffin, a meaningless object everyone wants because the script says it's valuable. Number 12. Humphrey Bogart was 5'8". Ingrid Bergman was 5'9". This created a studio crisis because leading men were supposed to be taller than their romantic interests. Cinematographer Arthur Edison used every trick available. Bogart wore 3-inch platform shoes in most scenes. Bergman wore flats. When they stood together, Bogart stood on wooden apple boxes positioned just out of frame. Camera angles were carefully calculated so both actors' feet were never fully visible simultaneously. Watch the famous "We'll Always Have Paris" scene closely. Bergman is slightly leaning backward and Bogart is clearly elevated. The Paris flashback scenes used even more aggressive camera angles, shooting Bogart from below to add height. The film's most romantic couple was built on literal platforms. Number 13. The ending you know, Rick sending Ilsa away with Laszlo, wasn't the original ending. Early script drafts had Rick dying in a shootout with Nazis, Ilsa staying in Casablanca as a widow. Test audiences in late 1942 hated it and called it depressing and pointless during wartime. Warner Brothers demanded reshoots. The airport farewell was filmed in January 1943, 6 months after principal photography wrapped. Humphrey Bogart was furious because he'd moved on to another film and had to interrupt that schedule. If you compare his appearance in the airport scene to earlier cafe scenes, his hairstyle is noticeably different, barely disguised by careful lighting. The delayed shoot cost $40,000 in additional production expenses, but but the new ending tested phenomenally. Rick's sacrifice became noble instead of feudal. Number 14, Warner Brothers hired an actual defected SS officer as a consultant for Nazi uniform accuracy. The studio wanted Casablanca's German officers to look authentically menacing, not like Hollywood costume department fantasies. Conrad Veidt, who played Major Strasser, insisted on historical accuracy because he wanted audiences to genuinely fear the character, not see a cartoonish villain. According to Warner Brothers production notes, Veidt refused to soften Strasser's dialogue, keeping lines that portrayed Nazi ideology as coldly logical rather than obviously evil. Compare Casablanca's German uniforms to other 1940s war films. Casablanca's are perfect down to the insignia placement and metal ribbons. The consultant's name was scrubbed from credits after complaints from Jewish advocacy groups who felt the studio shouldn't be employing anyone with SS history, even defectors. Number 15, round up the usual suspects. We'll always have Paris. Play it, Sam. These iconic lines share something. They weren't in the script. Claude Rains ad-libbed round up the usual suspects during the final scene, a throwaway line to end the shot. Michael Curtiz loved it and kept it. We'll always have Paris was Bogart's spontaneous addition during an emotional take. The script called for a longer, more explicit speech about their past. And play it, Sam. That exact phrase never appears in the film. Bergman says play it only in the Paris flashback. In Casablanca, she says play it without the name. The misquote became more famous than the actual dialogue. Americans quoted a line that doesn't exist. Casablanca's most memorable moments were accidents, improvisations, and collective false memories. Number 16. Before the US entered World War II, the State Department reviewed Casablanca's script for anti-Nazi content that might damage diplomatic relations. Files from the Office of War Information, now in the National Archives, show 3 scenes were cut for diplomatic reasons. One where Rick explicitly calls Nazis murderers, another showing German officers executing civilians, and a third depicting concentration camps. These weren't artistic choices. They were political requirements. After Pearl Harbor in December 1941, all restrictions were lifted. The scenes were restored during reshoots in early 1942. The government literally controlled what audiences could see about Nazis before America joined the war. Casablanca became explicitly anti-fascist only after the US committed to fighting fascism. The film's moral clarity was partially government approved. Number 17. Warner Brothers didn't fully own the rights to Casablanca during production. Murray Burnett, who wrote the original play Everybody Comes to Rick's, sold the rights for $20,000 in January 1942, but his agent had previously sold adaptation rights to another studio. The overlapping contracts created a legal nightmare discovered mid-filming. Warner Brothers faced potential shutdown of the entire production. Studio lawyers negotiated desperately while cameras kept rolling. According to legal documents uncovered decades later, Warner Brothers paid an emergency $20,000 settlement to clear the rights, essentially buying the source material twice. Jack Warner personally ordered all internal memos about the rights dispute destroyed. Only external legal correspondence survived. Hollywood's most beloved romance was nearly killed by a paperwork error. Number 18. Ingrid Bergman's Swedish accent almost got her fired. Warner Brothers executives worried American audiences wouldn't accept a European actress playing a character whose loyalties were ambiguous. Studio memos debated replacing her with an American actress who could sound more trustworthy, but the accent became Casablanca's secret weapon. An American accent would have made Ilsa seem traitorous, an American woman torn between duty and romance. The Swedish accent made her seem like another refugee, displaced and desperate, making her choices sympathetic instead of suspicious. What the studio initially saw as a casting flaw became psychological genius. By the film's release, those same executives were celebrating Bergman's exotic continental charm in publicity materials. The accent they nearly fired her for became a selling point. Sometimes, studios accidentally hire perfectly despite their own doubts. Number 19. Warner Brothers secretly filmed test footage of Casablanca in Technicolor. Studio executives, riding high from the success of The Adventures of Robin Hood and Gone with the Wind, believed color was the future. They wanted to see if Casablanca's atmosphere would translate. According to surviving Warner Brothers archives, they filmed the opening montage and one cafe scene in full 3-strip Technicolor in August 1942. The tests were disastrous. The color made the shadowy noir atmosphere look like a musical. Rick's Cafe, designed to feel dangerous and mysterious in black and white, looked like a cheerful nightclub in color. Production designer Carl Jules Weil's careful lighting became garish. The tests were immediately shelved. Jack Warner ordered all color footage destroyed. Only production still survived, occasionally appearing in studio retrospectives decades later. Number 20. The film ends with Rick and Captain Renault walking into the fog, beginning a beautiful friendship. That wasn't the planned ending. A final scene was written, filmed, and then cut, showing Rick and Renault joining a free French garrison in the desert. The scene featured both men in military uniforms, rifles over shoulders, marching with other soldiers toward an uncertain future. The footage was shown to test audiences, who found it anticlimactic after the emotional airport farewell. Editor Owen Marks argued the fog was a better ending, leaving their future ambiguous rather than explicit. Michael Curtiz agreed reluctantly. The cutscene would have made Rick's transformation complete, but robbed the ending of mystery. The footage was lost in a Warner Brothers vault fire in 1968. Only script pages remain. That iconic farewell wasn't planned. The ending changed months after filming wrapped. Rick's sacrifice became cinema's most noble gesture only after test audiences rejected the original darker finale. The fog, the farewell, the friendship in Casablanca were all last-minute decisions that created accidental perfection. Which hidden detail surprised you most, and what film should we open next?